Welcome to World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Dean Stoecker. Dean was co-founder and former CEO of Alteryx and current chairman of Alteryx, a $5 billion market cap data analytics automation platform. Dean, welcome to World of DaaS.
Hey, I'm glad I'm a data nerd.
Yeah, well, good. We've got two of us here. So it's a plus probably every single person listening to this is a data nerd too. So now, Alteryx is a really interesting company, and not too many people understand like the whole history. It was founded in 1997, and you kind of took a different approach to building Alteryx than the typical venture-funded SaaS company. I think it took Alteryx like 10 years to get to 10 million in revenue, and then all of a sudden it just like exploded and everything took off. Like, how did you even stick with it the whole time, and what's that genesis story?
Yeah, no, it's a great journey. In fact, I'm writing a book right now called Masterpiece: The Emotional Journey to Creating Anything Great.
Okay, I got to read this.
And it is a long journey. There's two ways I think to see success in the tech world. One is, be the tortoise, and the other is to be the hare. And I think it depends on what sector you're in and the DNA that you and your team are made of to kind of determine what path to take. For us, it was a 20-year-old overnight success to get the IPO, which is definitely not your conventional Silicon Valley journey. Although I have to be careful when I say that, because if you look back at even companies like Tableau, it took them, I think, 15 years to go public. So it's not like you just don't hear about these stories. You hear about the rocket ship, that went public in 3 years and it's growing at 200%. So our journey started early, and you're right, it took a decade to get to 10 million. We went public 20 years after we started, and we were 85 million in revenue when we went out in March of 17. And I think this year we're expected to do north of 600 million ARR.
In some ways, like Charlie Munger has a famous saying: he wants to get rich slowly, and sometimes people are in too much of a hurry to get wealthy. Do you kind of ascribe to that, or how do you think about it?
Well, if the opportunity had arisen to go faster, I would have. It's funny because Charlie Munger might be right on one hand as an investor, but on the other hand, if you're listening to the pundits on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, I think the phrase is slow growth is slow death. And so somewhere in between is the truth.
Yeah.
And for us, I always I do a lot of mentoring now that I'm retired, do a lot of mentoring to young CEOs who might not be prepared for a 23-year journey. And so I mentor them on things that they need to think about. And, I think that going back to speed, you shouldn't worry about going fast. You should, the CEO's only job is to make sure that your money outlasts your ability to find the product market fit. And for us, it just took a long time. I don't think the product market fit really took hold until 2014.
You basically invented this kind of category of analytic automation, right? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So the analytics space has been very fragmented for a long time. I think we're probably the only pure play and self-service analytics vendor that exists today. And there's so much confusion about analytics. On one hand, you've got the diagnostic dashboard folks who believe that they're involved in analytics. You've got a billion Excel users who believe they're dealing with analytics. You've got, a million SaaS Institute users who believe that data science is critical. And nobody really had a good handle on defining what the analytics space looked like. And over the last 5 years or so, we began to hone in on what was really happening in the space. And it began, I think, with the first wave of digital transformation. where people said, we need to automate processes. We need to identify our business processes and find out how to build analytics around them and then automate them. Data during this time was also fairly elusive. It's still very fragmented. Data is all over the place, in the cloud, on the ground, in every container, every type.
And many different apps. Yeah.
It's all over. And so in our case, we decided to make sure that we could see the emergence of the data world with the automation world. And the only way you can actually get to digital transformation is the third element of analytic process automation, and that is upskilling of the worker. It's never going to be done by people living in VLOOKUPs in Excel, and it's never, digital transformation isn't going to be done by the SaaS, PhD trained statisticians. It's going to be done by mere mortals in the line of business, in every functional area, from sales ops to marketing ops to FP&A to supply chain. And so our road was intentional. We said, we're going to take the biggest TAM. We're not going to fall into the BI trap. We're not going to fall into the descriptive analytics trap. We recognized early on that analytics is a continuum. It goes from really simple things that you can do in a dashboard like Tableau or Click, all the way up through spatial analytics to predictive modeling to machine learning to automated modeling. And we're the only platform that actually allows code-free and code-friendly approaches to that entire continuum.
You benefited from this massive trend at least over the last 10 years. We've seen this massive rise of data science, right? So the number of data scientists has grown 10x, more than 10x in the last 10 years. There's a lot. So you had this huge, you obviously saw that trend early, and you had this huge wave that helped I'm sure that helped your company. How did you identify that trend?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I don't think we knew it was going to happen. We knew that there would be the emergence of the citizen data scientist.
Yep.
We're never going to see more than 2 million trained statisticians in the world, but we've identified 50 million potential citizen data scientists who typically live in complex VLOOKUPs. Like
a McKinsey analyst or something, or
of course. And this is why today we have 100,000 users of Alteryx at PwC, because they hated their jobs before using Excel trying to do this complex work. And they all, as a company, to digitally transform, they actually wanted to upskill the entire workforce. And Alteryx is a perfect vehicle for upskilling workers to really get the better sense around seeing data as an asset and analytics as a continuum, all for the purpose of automating all business processes so that you can seek out what's reported as being a $15 trillion value that's locked up in data sources around the world.
The first time we met, you told me that the derivation of the word Alteryx is from alter YX. And so explain the geospatial roots of Alteryx.
Yeah, no, well, that's where most of my career had been. I grew up in the data business, very similar to the kinds of things you're doing, although this was long before cloud. And so having data as a service wasn't really an offering back in the day when I was working for content companies. But all the companies I worked for sold data. And I don't think many of them recognize that the ultimate value in content is when that content becomes ubiquitous. If everyone has the ability to touch it, to play with it, to make it dance, and the only way you can get ubiquity in content, and I don't care if it's POI data, if it's demographic information, things coming out of SQL stores or off of cloud services, it's just data to me. And the ultimate value that you get is when everyone has it. In order for that to occur, people have to have that data wrapped around in elegant, easy to use software. Our drag and drop, click and run approach was the answer to that. You then have to apply an analytic layer to allow users to prosecute both the simple analytics in a dashboard that might end up in Tableau or a PowerPoint presentation or whatever, all the way up through automated modeling. And I just think that what happened was we saw the first wave in about 2009 with the emergence of Click. And we said, well, they made it easy to, create beautiful dashboards, but it was still sold to IT. It was managed by IT, governed by IT, paid for by IT. And we said that's not the market we want to be in. And we said there's going to be something next, because every disruption that occurs in the tech world has successors. And it was Tableau. It was Tableau in 2011, 12.
And we saw like Looker and some of these other companies in that space. Yep.
But we started in the spatial business until we found that product market fit. In order for Alteryx to survive, we had to find high value use cases for our platform. We were selling Alteryx for $55,000 a seat in 2013.
Yeah.
We were selling it for $4,000 in 2014. And so for spatial, because my background was spatial, we said, let's, because
the very best at this one niche.
Let's be great at spatial, because spatial is a weird science. It's hard to do. My belief is that the Esris and the map infos, as good as those companies were, they were focused on the map, not on the answers. In some cases, the answer can be found in a map, but it's the content that drives it. Data is the fuel, the rocket fuel for GIS, the elixir of life for a box of tools. And so we said, let's just prosecute spatial. We'll start to add in all the other components of the analytic continuum until we find the perfect product market fit. And we found that in 2014.
You mentioned this, like data sets, like it seems like they become more valuable, obviously, when you can easily use them and manipulate them. So that's where the value of like an Alteryx comes in. They also become more valuable when you're more easily joined to other data sets, right? Whether it's joined to internal first-party data or other third-party data sets. How do you think about things like join keys or the value of these other ways of like linking these data sets together?
Well, even doing spatial analytics requires the ability to join multiple data sets. So if you're doing complex spatial work like network optimization for retailers, super hard problem that the Esris and the map infos had struggled with. Not because they couldn't do it, but the engines weren't fast enough to perform. If you have a couple thousand stores in your network and a few million data points for block centroids or whatever it happens to be, with a bunch of demographic information and competitive information and price information, it's really hard to perform these kinds of things. And so we just decided to focus in on, well, the thing that everyone needs. I mean, everything that happens in business happens somewhere. And so we decided to focus in on that. And I think we really got our footing with spatial. And then customers started saying, hey, this is so easy to use. I can now join all my relevant data sources. We did a study back in, I think just before we went public with IDC, and they said that 64% of analysts said they need no less than 7 disparate databases for any analytic outcome.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So,
so joining them together is really important.
Joining and cleaning and organizing and enhancing and all of that stuff becomes very, very important if you're going to get to analytics that matter for people.
You mentioned Esri a couple of times, like the CEO of Esri, Jack Dangerbar, has also been on this podcast, and in some ways, like you remind me a lot about him. Like you both built these like very iconic companies. You both kind of got rich slowly. You both kind of like built your companies in Southern California. Like, is it a fair comparison to both of you are geo nerds? Is it a fair comparison to compare you guys?
It's funny. I admire Jack a lot. He's built a $1.5 billion company, something like that. I almost went to work there actually before starting Alteryx. Interesting. And I told Jack no. I said I'm going to start my own business. And I don't know if there's really any comparisons. I think we see the GIS world completely differently. His perhaps through the lens of a map, and mine through the lens of data. Because ultimately, I mean, that's the Alter YX. You got to have the data before the map becomes even relevant. And you think about navigation in your car. You don't look at the map, you listen to the directions, right? It's a data play. And so I'm not minimizing the importance of a map for certain applications, but I don't know, it's public sector. I think they do incredible work. I think they haven't done as well in the private sector because people want more people to utilize geospatial, and Alteryx provides that mechanism for everyone to engage.
In that time frame where you're starting to expand, you're starting to grow, like how did you figure out how to break into new industries? Did you leverage partners? Did you hire like specific industry focused sales force to like, how did you break into these new different industries?
It's a great question because by design, we were horizontal. We chose not to go into a vertical until year 21.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because we didn't want to box ourselves in, as being the price optimization vendor or just the geospatial vendor. And a lot of the point solutions that exist out there, they're all getting disrupted by Alteryx. Because people want more capabilities and fewer tools, not more tools. And instead of having a software portfolio, if you're an enterprise company, instead of having 15 different analytic solutions for each functional area, you get one with Alteryx. And then you provide mobility for your workforce because they can now go from sales ops to FP&A or FP&A to supply chain or whatever it happens to be. And so we decided to go horizontal for a long time until I think healthcare might have been one of our first, because domain expertise in these complex data worlds like healthcare, where you've got lots of regulatory compliance and HIPAA rules and disparate healthcare data sets. I think that's when we started realizing that deeper expertise would generate additional ARR.
Did you find any success in using channels, or were basically always going direct to the customer?
No, we did. In fact, you might not believe this, but some of the very earliest customers of Alteryx were ESRI and MapInfo, where we OEM'd our technology.
Okay, so essentially they were big channels in a way, or?
They were not. MapInfo was a big channel. They actually tried to buy us back in, I think it was 2002. And of course we were not even, on first base yet with the company. So we said, we're just going to roll this out because we think it's a significant play. But for channel partners, yeah, we leverage channel partners in significant ways, both resellers in local markets. So today we're selling in something like 93 countries around the world. And usually there's a partner involved if it's outside of a domain where we've got a sales team and a support team. So we lead with channel partners. They're very good on the land. Some are better on the expand than others. But the best partnerships tend to be the analytic consulting firms, the global SIs. Almost all of them have standardized in Alteryx, KPMG.
Right, so they're both your customer, and then they bring you into new customers when they sign engagements and stuff.
Yeah, in almost all cases, they were sell to, and then they realized that we can recommend this to customers, or we can do all the work for customers using this platform. And so they've become a great channel for us both.
Is there a way to incent them to more likely recommend, or how do you build that relationship with them?
I think for most of them, because they're customers first, we don't have to wait for them to recommend something, because they see the value, they see the ROI in almost every use case. And so there's no special incentives. There's, fairly low margin shift. And, some of our biggest global partnerships now have a model where aspirationally it's $1 billion in revenue to us over 5 years. So it's not the same as resellers, but both are critical in global growth.
Because Alteryx has really built a very large user community. You've got this academy, you got discussions, you got events, support. I actually spoke at an Alteryx event in 2018. It was amazing. It was huge. It was like it seemed like you took over the entire town of Irvine. What advice would you give to emerging software companies about how to develop a community?
Well, I think what's funny is most software companies, I'm not sure they even believe in communities. They see it as a cost, and I can tell you that it is not. And so I had community report to me for the first 3 years because I wanted it to be.
You had like a head of community reported directly to the CEO.
To me, yeah. Because what we recognized is that when we talk about this big analytic continuum, it's tricky because you can do almost anything in Alteryx. I mean, it's used for everything from derivatives modeling and banking to hedging fuel in airlines to running, on-field player analytics for the Green Bay Packers. And so it covers off in this gigantic swath. And because there's hundreds of tools, or what we call building blocks inside of Alteryx that can be used together, and that means 200 or 300 factorial. So we have now billions of combinations of how you could build analytic pipelines. People need, what I'm trying to say is we've proved that analytics is a social experience.
Okay, so wait, even when you were like 10 million in revenue, you mentioned your 55,000 seats. So you only have a couple hundred seats essentially at 10 million in revenue. You still had this like community function reporting to you, and it was really focused on this robust community?
No way. Because back in 2013, we were doing these $55,000 seats. We'd probably add 8 or 9 logos a quarter. In 2014, we did a bunch of price testing with Tableau. And we found the sweet spot. We found the fact that people who use Tableau don't want to be just in Tableau. They actually want to move up the analytic continuum, and Tableau couldn't provide the rest of that continuum. And that's when we recognized we went from 9 logos a quarter to 250 logos a quarter day one. It was crazy. And so we knew that having a community was going to be valuable, especially as we saw net expansion rates that were, the SaaS industry average for net expansion is something like 106 or 107. For us, for G2K customers, I think it's still 134, something like that.
Holy mackerel. Wow. That's
So
really high.
When people land with 2 seats in 45 days, we know that they're going to buy a bunch more seats in the subsequent quarters. And so we wanted to provide an experience that would allow people to communicate with each other, to share workflows. And we have a massive community now. We've won a bunch of awards for being the #1 community.
Okay, so step one in advice is like just care about the community. Essentially, like actually think it's important. What's step 2? Like, how does you can't it doesn't I've been involved in a lot of companies who want to do a community. Somehow it still doesn't just appear. It seems like it's a lot of work to develop a community.
You have to invest. I would say have a commitment to, my phrase within the company has always been customer trust defines the integrity of your company. And to gain that trust, you've got to support them. And you can either support them linearly by hiring a bunch more people as you win more customers, which is a terrible financial model, or you build out a community to where they can support each other. Not only do you get massive ticket deflections in your support center, but you actually get people coming up with incredible ideas and sharing work product that you hadn't thought of before. So I would say make sure you invest. I don't know how many people we have in the community team today. It's got to be well north of 25 or 30, which is very unusual because most executives, when they decide to cut something, the first thing they go at are things like community. And that's just, we publicly have stated that community users of Alteryx, those companies expand 3 times as much as people who are not involved in communities. So we know it works for the benefit of us and most importantly, the benefit of customers.
When I've been like in and around the Alteryx like community and forums and stuff, like some of these top community members have posted like thousands of times. How do you think about these engaged members? How do you get people up the stack to get them more engaged? Is it just kind of supporting them and trusting them, or how do you kind of move them to kind of like once a year to many times a year?
Well, I think that's just the natural impact of having spent the money and had a company focus around community. People who, you look at the entire software world has gone social with almost everything. And we kind of knew once we started to see the expand model that it was going to happen in a complex space like this too. And so I think it's just natural. It's just natural. People who, obviously we put in a lot of gamification, lots of badges. And so there's the reward system of having all the badges, but people genuinely want to help other people. And it's been really one of the best things I've ever done.
You talked a couple of times, like there was this transition where you went from 55K a seat to 4K a seat. As a CEO, to me, that sounds like an incredibly scary time, even if you really believe in your strategy and your market. How did you go into that? Did you do anything to kind of like mitigate that before, because it might not start working like day one, or like, how do you think about that decision? In some ways, it seems like one of the most important decisions that was made in the company's history was that one decision.
It was one of many big decisions. Well, it's when you go from being a tortoise to becoming the hare, and we knew it was going to happen. We just knew it was going to happen. Because it was Click and then Tableau. And then, the contemporary audience of software vendors that we grew up with had chosen the wrong path. The Pexatas, Trifactas, Datameres, Burse. I think the only other one that actually has made it was Domo. And they've struggled with getting to even their last round. I think they're right about market cap where their last round of funding was 3 years ago. So it was $30 million when we made that decision. We were $30 million, and we did testing. We did testing, and as an analytics company, the last thing you want to do is prove it to yourself that you need to do it, and then be afraid to make the decision. And so we made the decision. We had some make goods with customers who had paid us the previous quarter. $55,000 a seat.
How did it you just called up some huge customer and said, hey, you were paying us a few $100K a year, and now you're paying us like $30K a year?
No, they would still pay us a few $100K a year. We just give them a whole bunch more seats.
You're still paying the same revenue, but now we're going to give you, we're going to allow a lot more people in your organization to start benefiting from this product.
Yeah, and this is part of those difficult decisions on the emotional journey to creating anything great. It's for me, community was a big decision because we there were arguments with product early on because I said, if we're going to build a community, we're going to integrate it into the UI of the platform. And not everybody believed in community because in the companies that they had been with, community wasn't held to a high standard. And so those decisions were important. Pricing decisions, packaging, making acquisitions to round out the platform were important decisions. I think the most important decision, that if there's up and coming entrepreneurs in your audience here, was starting a group, a strategy team we call Bing Fa. I'm somewhat of a Sun Tzu Art of War fan. And Sun Tzu said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And so early on in 2004, at our very first strategy meeting, we had been building out individual components for Alteryx for the first 6 years. Allocate, Solocast, Geonetics, our own geocoding engine. And we decided in 2004 at the very first strategy Bing Fa meeting, we decided to build Alteryx, the platform. And it was out about a year and a half later.
If I remember right, you grew the business initially to about 20 million in revenue before taking outside funding. What was the decision to like put off the fundraising? Was it an overt strategy? And then like, why at that point should you step up the gas and bring in some extra outside capital?
All of the founders, we all grew up in family run businesses. So we all kind of knew that you had to be conservative until you needed to be a little bit more aggressive. And for me, until you find the product market fit, that's the most expensive part. That is the most expensive part. And I think the other part of it is just outlook. So, the Valley has great companies, but there's a lot of people who I think see raising money as a badge of honor. I always saw it as
a score. Some people have it as a scorecard as itself. We raised $100 million,
and we're a unicorn.
And we're just going to celebrate the company. Yeah.
And to me, that I always saw raising money as a sign of a weakness until you find the product market fit. And so, we went 14 years self-funded. 2011 was our first raise. We raised $6 million. We were 18 million at the time. And then of course, once we saw the product market fit, I raised 163 million in 3 rounds over 4 years. And then in 2017, went public. And so there's a time and a reason to raise money, but not because you want to be a unicorn. Because I think in fact, our favorite line was, we didn't want to be a unicorn. We wanted to be a monster truck. and a monster truck was defined by us as a $500 million market cap company growing at 50%. And we did that. And in the end, we ended up at a $5.5 billion play, which is not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad at all. Now, one of the things you did right before or pretty close to going public is you changed out basically the entire leadership team except for the co-founders. Like, how did you think about that decision, and how would you advise other founders thinking about their leadership team in different stages?
Yeah, I think the hard part about being a CEO is that you've got to be willing to make those, tough decisions. To think that the people who got you to 20 million are the people who are going to get you to 200, I think there'll be people who surprise you that can do that. And I certainly had people who could do that. But I think as the stakes get bigger, as the public optics get, more critical, you just have to be willing to change out. And so, I think the 3 or 4 months before the IPO and the 2 months after the IPO, pretty much everybody on my team was new. I mean, those are scary decisions because, I hired all those people.
Yeah, totally.
but you got to know who's rowing in your boat, when the seas get tough, and not everyone's cut out for it.
Now, recently, after 23 years at the helm of the company, you decided to step down as CEO. It's like peak COVID, you're stepping down. Like, walk us through that decision, and what advice would you give to other long-serving CEOs?
Well, I tell you what, Auren, the funniest thing for me was, I never really thought much about succession planning. Now, I'm 64 years old, so that has to come into play. Even though I'm healthy, it has to come into play at some point.
Hey, Warren Buffett's still running Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think he now has a successor.
He does now, finally, yes. Yeah.
But my very first board meeting, our NomGov committee said to me, okay, we need to start succession planning. And I said, well, wait a minute. You want me to plan my own demise? And so we spent every single board meeting talking about succession planning.
Starting even like 2012 type of time frame, or
no, 2017 with the board.
Oh, okay, with like the public board.
We discussed it with the investors from 2014 on, but it became more serious. One, because as a public company, you have to do succession planning. I mean, it would be a shame if something had happened and we weren't ready. And so I started replacing my VCs off the board with operating board members, found Mark Anderson at Palo Alto Networks. He joined our board almost 3 years ago now, and he was like the perfect outsider running for the role. And he's had a couple of years, under his belt on the board, and now has my role. And I think for founding CEOs, you have to be more careful with succession planning, because a lot of CEOs who might take over might not want to, have an executive chair like me looking over your shoulder.
You feel real ownership in this company, and so I'm
still the largest shareholder, and my personal nest egg is in Alteryx stock, and so you would think that I would be all over this stuff. And I told Mark that was a great partnership that we made. I said, listen, I'm only going to help you when you ask for it. I'll be a great board member and I'll lead the board, but I'm only going to get involved when you need me to get involved. And there's been some cases, but because he's a first-time CEO, but he's got all the DNA to take Alteryx to $1 billion company.
How did you know this was the right time for you? How do you know, 2020 rather than 2022 or 2018? Like, how do you know, this is the time for me now to actually go through the succession?
I don't think anyone really, there's probably people who plan their careers from start to finish, and they have it in a notebook or on a calendar, and they're living and dying by that calendar. I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I didn't start Alteryx till I was age 40. In fact, people say, what would you tell your 25-year-old self? I would say, don't wait till you're 40 to start. and so I think it's knowing that you've built a business that can be inherited in a pretty seamless way. That I was a quarterback in high school, and I wasn't that great of a quarterback, in part because I would always hand the ball off, or someone else had to catch the ball. And so you have to be willing and prepared to turn it over to somebody else. And for me, I found the perfect guy, and it just seemed like a good time. I didn't want to lose Mark and his opportunity. And he's done it twice. He's one of a handful of people on the planet that have built multiple times to $1 billion.
Okay, so a couple of personal questions. So if you were governor of California or Colorado, what data would you look at to better run the government?
Wow. Well, I think that governments need to utilize every possible piece of data to be more efficient with taxpayers' money. We do a lot of work in state and local governments. We do some work in the Fed, with interesting agencies like DOD and Commerce. Our first two contracts with the Census Bureau was managing the delivery of decennial census data. And, that data gets used by urban planners. It gets used by
everybody.
By everybody. And so I think governments need to be better stewards with our tax dollars by leveraging content, and not cell phone content and things like that. But I'm talking about things that really help distribute services more efficiently. And I think until governments modernize their workforce,
efficiently, like a traveling salesman problem, or like, okay, we have to actually invest in the things that are working and stop investing in things that are not working?
Well, I think digital transformation needs to happen at all levels of government. A lot of the agencies in DC still are struggling, and I think chief data officers only came into present being less than 2 years ago. And so understanding the data you've got, rather than every agency having their own, we'll look at the work that you're doing. I mean, all of the OpenGov initiatives for making it easier for people to consume everything from property tax records to voting data, even though there's probably people who wouldn't want that to happen. There's all kinds of data that can be used to improve the way government operates, because I think that smaller government is needed. And I think, instead of raising taxes, let's figure out a way to leverage content to make better decisions.
It's hard somehow in an inertia for government to make some of these hard decisions, because there are these things that government are doing like incredibly well, and there's people are benefiting incredible, but there's also other things that maybe, like all companies, you try things out and some things like didn't work out, but they keep going. There's this inertia to keep these certain things going that are maybe not working so well. How is that just like, do we just have to live with that? That's just the way it is for government, or is there some sort of way of like putting something in place so these harder decisions can be made?
Well, this goes back to the very first part of the conversation that we started out in, and that was around APA. Analytic process automation needs to occur within the government. And the most important part of APA is upskilling the workforce. What's going to hurt government is when, talented Python coders come out of college and they can say, do I want to go work for the government, or do I want to go work for Google? And we know what decision they're going to make. And I think that puts the government further and further behind. So they've got to be cognizant of upskilling the workforce by giving them fun, engaging platforms like ours, and probably not only ours, there's probably lots of other things that allow people to get excited about going to work and solving complex problems. And every agency has these issues. And I think that until there is a true digital transformation effort, and I know the government's invested a lot of money, but you're right, it's a big ship that is trying to turn. They've got to do things a bit differently, and taking some lead from the private sector, I think, is a reasonable approach.
Okay, last question we ask all of our guests. Beside for telling yourself in your 20s to start Alteryx or a company like that, if you had to go back in time, what advice would you wish you could have told your younger self?
I think it really is about having the courage to start. I guess I did. I have, and you'd read this in my book. I had 3 or 4 other startups. They were small, didn't cost me a lot, although one was big enough to hurt. But get out there and learn and take chances and identify opportunities. I mean, it's amazing what's happening. Clayton Christensen talks about disruptive innovation, and there's so many things that have yet been disrupted. And that whole process of taking an old practice and putting it in the hands of a whole new user class, that's all we did. We didn't change analytics. We simply democratized it. And anyone who's thinking about starting a business, make sure that it's a disruptive innovator, and take the chance and go for it. And don't isolate yourself, because what I learned from the very beginning was that no one's going to believe your idea as much as you. And so be patient, get ready for the long journey, because it will take you through the peaks of enlightenment and the troughs of disillusionment, even through the swamp of effing despair.
Yeah, and read some Sun Tzu, maybe on the way.
Yeah, right.
All right, this has been awesome. Thank you, Dean. Tell people where they can find more about you on the internet, or.
My LinkedIn is Dean Stoecker. You can Google me. There's all kinds of fun interviews like this one, from everyone from CNBC to podcast with all kinds of people around the world, in Middle East and in Europe. And for any entrepreneurs who are interested, I'm happy to. I've got more time on my hands, of course, now. I'm happy to have a chat with you if you're trying to figure out what to do or struggling through some of the decisions, because over 23 years, I've probably seen most of the things that you're likely to see. And whether you take the information and run with it or seek additional advice, just don't be afraid to reach out. It's dstoecker@alteryx.com.
One of the most amazing things about like the entrepreneurial environment that we live in is that there are people like you, and you're not alone. There are many people like you who've had incredible success and then are willing to mentor and help. And I had many, when I was a younger CEO, I had many people like you help me out. And it's just this incredible thing in the water or the air, that people like you are not just off on their yacht or, something, that they're actually willing to be engaged and help people for really just because they like to help.
Well, I think that when you've been through the trials and tribulations of a 23-year journey, not having raised for 14 years, there's a lot of advice that you can give to people.
Oh yeah.
As forewarning. There's no book you can buy that's going to tell you, how to do this. My book might be the closest. It'll give you some tips, not in running the business necessarily, but in running yourself.
When does your book Masterpiece come out?
Hopefully in September. We're kind of going through the drafts at the present moment.
Okay, awesome. I really can't wait to read it. Thank you so much, Dean, for being on World of DaaS. It's been a real pleasure.
All right. Thanks to the data nerds.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, consider leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and that's DAAS, DaaS, you could subscribe right here on our YouTube channel, or you could find me on Twitter at Auren, AUREN, Auren. I'd love to hear from you.